so this was your grandfather's?
My grandfather. So when you talk to my dad, it was Grandpa Ray, and then my dad was Denny, and so Grandpa Ray is the Benton on the top, and then Dennis Benton is the son, and this is where my dad grew up, and this house and this farm, and we had pigs here. We had all the grain storage bins back there, all the large machinery. The shop was here. Everything was here. So we would run down. We'd run a half a mile from our home over there to here, and we'd work on the farm, and it was pretty amazing. So it looks a little different now compared to what it looked like before. I suppose just cattle and pigs.
Okay.
And then what we call row crops. So we would grow corn, we'd grow sunflowers, we'd grow wheat. So all of the different row crops as well. Yep.
Very cool.
So here's the Benton farm. All right.
As the granddaughter of a gardener, I learned to appreciate fresh food from a young age. Now with my own garden in the city, it's time to plant. As a registered dietitian, I'm inspired by the food I'm able to grow. I'll share my tips on how to be a nutritional cook and make homegrown the star of my recipes. Learning from educational resources, friends, and some wise seasoned veterans, I seek to uncover the secrets of gardening.
Well, I'm originally from Ipswich, South Dakota, a little town of about 1,000 people. I grew up on a farm, cattle, hogs, chickens, sheep, farmed about probably 2,000 acres, cropland, pasture combined. Ran a head of about 250 head of cattle, 100 head of hogs, and basically took most of those from the hogs from farm to market, and then the cattle we would sell them after about a year to a feedlot to fatten them up. We'd sell them at about 450 pounders. Basically, she asked me how I got interested in farming. I guess when you're a farm kid, that's all you know, that's all you see. So you have things that you like about the farm, you have things you don't like about the farm. I loved cattle, I loved animals. Didn't care so much for the other hard work, but that was the fun part of it. So I farmed for 28 years with my dad. We planted wheat, corn, barley, oats. Corn was mainly used for silage for feed for the cattle. We had a cash crop of sunflowers we used to plant. It was the oil kind. Wasn't what they call confectionery, which are the sunflower seeds you buy in a packet and they're salted and baked or whatever. So that was our main cash crop for probably the last 14, 15 years. Livestock was big, cattle was big in our area. I love cattle. I have many stories with cattle that I had that some people didn't like, and you couldn't help it because an animal is an animal. You never know how they're going to react from one time to the next. Mm-hmm. But I loved that, working with livestock. That was fun.
So I have a lot of people ask me this question. What is the difference between a dairy cow and a cow that is used to produce the meat that we see in the supermarket?
All right. There's basically two kinds of cattle. There's dairy cows and beef cows. Beef cows are used for the meat. Dairy cows are used for the milk. You feed them accordingly. The dairy cow, like a Holstein or a Guernsey, will not get big, and they'll get big, but they won't get muscular, but they'll produce quite a few thousand gallons of milk in a year's time. A beef cow will put on muscle on the calves, and they'll get butchered for hamburgers and steaks and all that, whereas the dairy cow is just ice cream or milk and things like that. They're both fairly similar as far as feeding and growing and having, for breeding purposes, you have to have bulls. Well, with dairy, maybe not so much anymore because I think they do a lot of artificial insemination, whereas beef cows, you usually have to have a bull with so many cows, 25, 30 cows, whatever. And that's how you increase your herd, make it more efficient. Get bigger cows, raise bigger calves, more meat, better quality. So that was a challenge. I liked that about as much as anything, was keeping records on cattle, because we never did that when I was growing up. Everybody just went out and you knew all the cows by name, because you didn't have maybe 20, 30 head, and you knew them all. When I got in and we expanded the corporation, cattle grazing and all that, we had about 250 head of cattle. So we had to keep records on the cows that had live calves and had big calves. You got rid of the ones that didn't raise as good a calf replacement.
Farming was just a way of life. It was how you grew up. It was your grandparents, your parents.
Pretty much.
So that got you into it, and you decided to stick with it because you didn't have to, but you wanted to.
Yeah, I basically would tell my dad I wanted to farm. He didn't want me to farm. He wanted me to be a doctor or lawyer or something like that, and I said, no, I'm going to farm. So we kind of butted heads a little bit of that while I was in high school and college, and we finally said, I'm coming back to farming, and he said, okay, we're not going to argue about anything. We'll just sit down and work everything out, and we're good. I farmed with him for 28 years.
Wow.
So it was a fun time. Some bad times with the weather, hailstorms, things like that. But you expect that with farming. You take the good with the bad. And since you're a farm kid growing up on the farm, you really haven't been exposed to other things that other kids do in town. I was lucky I got to go to a swimming pool or ride a bike and things like that in town with some buddies. But I always wanted to farm and kept it as long as I could hold on to it.
So it's in your blood.
Yeah, it's in my blood, yeah.
So
and it's transferred now from livestock and wildlife to plants around the place where we're retired at, basically.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing, I think, is that it was something that you're able to take and transfer it to once farming. How many acres of land did you have?
Probably, depending on whether you count, we had a grazing corporation with 7 farmers in it. Each had probably 75 head that could go on the grazing acres that we were allotted. And I think with our farm with pasture and crop ground was probably about 2,500 acres.
2,500 acres. And now you're gardening
probably about an acre and a half, maybe. I'm not sure what it is.
So it's kind of cool because you're taking all that experience and you've applied it to, your beautiful home now. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
You owned quite a bit of land, acres, and many years ago. So I'm wondering, how much does something like that cost?
Well, when I started, you could buy an acre of land for between $100 and $150. This is back in probably 60s, late 60s. And when I got out of the military, got back home, I bought a neighbor that was retiring. He had 2.5 quarters of land, a building site, older house, older barns. I bought that, and then we joined that with my dad's farm that had about, I think, 6 or 8 quarters, plus the grazing corporation with the cattle. And as you added to that, over the years, if you tried to buy some land, it got what I consider high at the time in the 70s, where it was going for $300, $350 an acre. And everybody's saying, oh, you can't make land pay for that. Or, well, I put it in what is called the CRP, which is a government program that you take the land out of production, you don't farm it, you have to keep the weeds off it, clip it, and then the government pays you so much to keep the farm idle, so because that prevents getting food, not shortages, but surpluses that they don't need and they can't move. That would drop the price of the grain, so they do the CRP. When I put that in, I had it in for about 3 years, and I decided to sell, so I sold it. It was around $450 an acre that I got for it at the time, but just like anything else in farming or looking hindsight versus foresight, if I'd have kept in it for the full 10-year contract, about a year after I got out, it went from $400 an acre to about $1,000 an acre. The next year it went to $2,000 an acre. It got up as high as $8,000 or $10,000 an acre. And of course, you don't get any of that because the farmers that bought it is what the ones that did that. So that was kind of a situation where, it's 20/20 hindsight. But I moved the house from the farm. That's what this house is here. Set it on the lot, bought some land here, and went to work for Wells Fargo for 20 years. And retired from that at age 72. And now I'm going to be 78 next week. So it's a situation where, okay, did I do the right thing? Well, it all worked out pretty good. So
Yeah. It's pretty cool. You moved your house from that. So this was your farmhouse, and you moved it where you are now.
Yeah. We built the house in 1980, and there's millbank movers that actually are house movers. They'll pick the whole house up, move it, put it on roller wheels or whatever, and move it. They moved it from the farm out to here, and then they set it down on a concrete basement. It was really something to see at the time, because I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah, really cool. You've obviously been doing farming for a very long time. And when you went from farming to 2,500 acres of land to now 1 acre of this, beautiful home, what makes farming / now gardening so fulfilling for you? And you kind of mentioned that you had the option to leave that profession, but you decided to stick with it. Why was that?
I guess it's just enjoyable to go. I like to watch things grow in the spring. I like the seasons, the 4 seasons. We have beautiful springs and summers. We have beautiful falls, and sometimes we have too cold of winters. But that, if you like skiing or snowmobiling and things like that, we have all 4 seasons, which is wonderful. What I got excited about when we moved out here is we wanted some color. My wife and I, we talked about what would we like, and we wanted something that would give us color from the start of the growing season to the end of the growing season. And just want to get colors throughout the whole summer. I want to start in the summer with colors and have different colors, something blossoming all year, so you have colors till it freeze up. And some of these, like these will blossom now, some will blossom later. A lot of these are coming now in the middle of the summer. This sedum here, that's the same sedum that's up there. I got a different color sedum down by the fire pit there. But these were yellow goldenrod, I think they call it. And I brought that up, and that was just a couple of plants, and that took over this whole corner, and there were some of them down there that we started. But here's rose bushes again, that some of the plants need to be picked off. This is a white rose bush, as you can see with the colors. Just
how you kind of designed your garden was kind of seasonally, so that you always have something in bloom.
Always had flowers of some color. We started out with a snowball bush, and that's the first one in the summertime to bloom. And it blooms all white flowers about the size of a tennis ball. And it's a perennial. It'll come back every year. You don't have to trim it back. And then we go to the next group of flowers, depending on what you buy, when you buy. You look on the tip here that tells you when they bloom. Or if you see them on here, every one of these has a snowball on it, and it's just covered white, and it lasts for about a week, 2 weeks, maybe in the spring. And that's, everybody watches for that one to blossom, because then it's like spring's coming.
Snowball bush.
The snowball bush, we call it. Yep.
This is cool.
This is a sumac. Can't remember the name. It's not a tiger eye sumac, but it is another sumac. I got 3 different kinds out here. And that one, some of them grow from a root from another one, so I cut it down and plant them in a different place. If you have some of them, you can do. So that's got the little white flowers. We have some red, we have some yellow, we have some big flowers, we have some that are just starting. We have ivory silk trees. Some of them do good, sometimes they don't. We have rose bushes that are usually pretty good. Red Prince Weigelias are blooming exceptionally well this year. They're not always like they were this year. Some years they're not quite as many of them, but this year they seem to have red branches because the flowers were growing so thick on them. We've had tiger sumac, which is a yellower sumac. We have the wild sumac that's here in the rocks. It's just basically a green sumac, but they'll spread on their roots underground, and then they'll come up 2 or 3 feet away from the main plant. So the biggest thing is use your card when you go to the place, kind of maybe draw your lot out and get an idea. Even go to a nursery and ask a guy for some hints what you would plant somewhere, because you got to have shade-loving plants in the shade and that kind of thing. According to the tag at this place where you buy them. And you want to watch for when they bloom. Some will be early spring, some will be midsummer, some will say a month or so before frost or after frost. So that's been my project here around the house, is to get flowers some type all year round in the landscape. And you've seen some of the pictures here. This little card I have here basically is it's a plant tag. You can get them at any place you buy a plant or a garden. And you want to pay attention of what's on the card, because this is a simple one, just a Spirea, gold flame, because of the color of the leaves. And then it's a Menards. I don't know if there's Menards in your area, but there are also farm places. It'll tell you it's a shrub, tells you the name, tells you how many hours of sunlight you need in the day. And then on the back side, when you look at them, it tells you it's a hardy deciduous shrub. Dark pink flowers bloom in mid to late summer, ideal for borders, hedges, or as a specimen plant. And that kind of gives you an idea what the plant's going to be when it reaches maturity. It'll have a note here, it needs 6 hours of sun every day. So you want to plant it you don't want to plant it in a shady place. You want to plant it out in the open where it's going to get 6 hours of sun. The next little information tag it has on it is, it tells you how high it's going to grow, 3 to 4 feet, this particular one. It tells you how wide it's going to grow, 3 to 4 feet wide. And then it says a slow release feed in spring. It's a fertilizer of any kind. Those you kind of have to watch how much you put on, and if it's turning yellow, it's too much, or if it's dying, it's too much, or if it's yellow, it may not be enough. So you kind of got to guess if it's getting any or not enough. You keep it well watered. This is a plant that takes quite a bit of water, and it's mid to late summer is the bloom time, is mostly what they have that. And it's hardy. The USDA has regulated zone. We have zone places in the United States that are regulated by the USDA, and you go from 1 to, I think it was 13, I'm not sure the number, and South Dakota is about a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, depending on the southern part of the state to the northern part of the state, and that just tells you the plants that grow in that particular zone. In other words, if you put a 1 or 2 plant, they're more likely going to be a patio plant or a house plant, because they're not going to live in the winter.
So I think that's a really important tip. So knowing your zone.
Yeah.
So you said look at the label,
yeah.
And then depending on where you live in the country, you can look it up online.
You can look it up online, or
usually
it'll tell you if you go to a local
garden
nursery,
center, they'll tell you what zone
they'll tell you, okay, you ask them what zone are we in, where you're planting, they'll tell you.
That's a good tip.
We're in this zone 5 or 4, or we're a 4 or 5 zone. We'll do either 2 zones will work good on.
So know your zone, because if you don't, you're going to end up potentially planting things that wouldn't be successful what your climate is made.
They'll freeze out or they'll dry out. Basically, what'll happen.
That's a good tip.
Yeah. Or they'll even get too wet and drown out. They can do that too, depending. If you got a cactus, you don't want to overwater a cactus. If you got a sunflower, you got to give it a ton of water.
Yeah.
Or corn, same thing. Yeah, it depends on where you're planting, what your zone is, and the soil. You have to soil test. That'll tell you how much fertilizer you should use. In the big farms, that they do that for great big fields. They'll go out with a semi or a big truck with a fertilizer tank on the back of it and spread the fertilizer on a big field. Whereas here you only got to sprinkle a little bit around the base of the plant.
Are a lot of the flowers native to South Dakota, or maybe some?
I think what happens is the nurseries adapt them to the zone that they're in. If there's a big nursery in Aberdeen, there's a couple of them, and they'll have Spireas or Weigela or something, and then the next year they'll say it's a new Hydrangea. They did some breeding with it and improved it somehow. Either bigger plant, more flowers, different colors, more winter hardy. Because when we started the Hydrangea, the only place I could grow one is in the corner where the southwest sun hit all the time. And now I got Weigelias all over the place because they've developed some where they're more cold weather adaptable now, so a different zone. And usually it's the nurseries that do that. They experiment with different plants and try to make them warmer or go into our zone, so they got more choice of flowers and they can sell new ones every year. But
this tag that comes on every plant, whatever plant you buy, it will have the zone, what zone this plant is best for. So you can just cross-reference that with the zone that you're living in.
You turn the other side, it'll tell you what the plant should look like.
And it will show you a little picture.
Or whatever.
So you know if it's not doing well, because you can compare it to the picture. So it's good to keep these as reference.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned when we were taking our tour around your yard about another tip about cutting the roots of things in half?
Yeah, if you look at some of the plants, they used to be $20 for a nice plant. Now they're like $60 for some with hydrangeas especially. And if you get a hydrangea and you look at it closely, you can take a knife and you can cut it down the center and check and make sure you don't cut the branch away from the root. And then you can usually get 4 plants out of one potted plant when you bring it home. So that gives you a little more economy. Now you might not always have 4 of them survive, but if you get 2 out of the 4 that survive, that's half price for your plant that you just paid for.
Yeah.
So,
and that, like a typical one you could try that with would be like a hydrangea bush. You could try cutting that. And do you have to cut it in the fall when it's not in bloom?
No, you usually cut them in the spring when you just buy them. They might have blooms on them already, depending on when the nursery has it. It's just a matter of cutting the hole the size of the ball approximately. You don't have to go twice the size that most of them say, make a big hole, but because then you just got to fill it up with topsoil and all that stuff that you want, fertilizer. But if you do it and you take a sharp knife, I start down the middle first, cutting it in half, because that kind of gives you an idea of where the stems are attached to the roots. So if you happen to cut off one accidentally, then you maybe do 3 instead of a 4. So tie the root with the stem. If you cut off the stem, usually you're killing the plant.
Okay. All right.
But you can save a lot of money and you can have a lot of extra plants by just trying that. In practice, you might ruin 1 or 2 starting out, but you get the hang of it once you do 3 or 4 a year or something like that, depending on your plant.
So to stretch your money, you can cut, let's say, a hydrangea bush into half or a 4ths, and you can end up with 4 times the amount of plants that you would if you just kept the one whole.
You say you're getting a 75% discount on 3 of the plants.
Love that. We won't tell the nurseries.
No, don't tell them what you're doing there. But the biggest thing is you want to water. You want to put some good soil. They have bags of garden soil moisture that has the fertilizer in it for 3 months, and if you want soil, you don't want what they call peat or some of the other types of.
Okay.
You want a regular black dirt soil with a little bit of fertilizer, and they sell them at different places too. But just look on the bag, because some of them will be peat moss mixed, or they'll be something different. You want to get something with garden soil and fertilizer.
For potting.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, even for planting.
For planting.
Yeah, planting, potting, anything. I don't ever use I guess the best one I use is always going to be the potting soil with the fertilizer in it. I don't buy a whole lot of that because I keep the lawn watered. We put maybe fertilizer on once in the spring. You don't need a whole lot of fertilizer once they're established.
Okay.
These again are just different hydrangea trees, tulip trees, or like lily trees, I guess. You go back in here more. But here's kind of some of these were probably where I cut a root ball out and planted some down here, and some of these took and some didn't, because I had some in different places. You can kind of see where they either rabbits or just didn't grow as good coming.
One of the things that you hear a lot about today is farm to table style cooking and a way of eating, and in a way to support our local farmers, and also to eat a seasonal variety of fruits and vegetables, and to what was the third thing? And to so buying local produce, eating seasonal varieties of fruits and vegetables, and also supporting the local farmers. So do you have any tips for people who want to eat that farm to table style, what they could do to support farmers?
Basically, if you take a drive in the country between towns where you live, just a Sunday afternoon drive, you may see a fruit stand or a vegetable stand of some farmer that has in their yard along the highway, and those are the ones where you're buying the product right directly from the farmer, probably giving him the better price for everything and not costing you as much as it would at the store. Mm-hmm. There are some specialties, there are some vegetable places, there are some fruit places, and there's also, I've seen eggs. chickens and eggs that they can buy on the farm. And I've also seen one place near, on the way I think is into Minneapolis, they have lamb, where they butchered the lambs and they sell parts of the lamb there without going through a butcher shop.
Wow.
So if you can support those kind of places, I think that'll help those particular farmers out, because usually they have a town job and that's a sideline maybe, but it does take a lot of work to feed animals, and especially if you're butchering them yourself, that's a whole big deal. And then if you've got vegetables that you're picking, you're on your hands and knees for most of those. So that's a good way to support them.
The best way to kind of support the farmer for the farmer to get the most money is probably to just buy from their farm stand. Wherever you live, you can probably find one in your area.
Usually in the fall, they're more prevalent because that's when their harvests come in, so they're not going to be year-round, and they're not maybe going to be early spring, depending on what it is. If it's chickens and eggs, yeah, that's more of a whole summer thing, but if it's hogs or cattle or gardening, that's going to be in the fall more.
Okay, so look in the fall. Is the rain gauge something that farmers use on a farm?
You'll have a farm on most of the quarters where you're at. If you had 2 old farmsteads, you'll have a couple of rain gauges on each farmstead, because you might get an inch here and you think you're good, but you'll go to the next quarter land, you're farming a mile or 2 away, you might only get 20 hundredths there from that storm. So then you got to realize, okay, that's not going to get as much moisture. Then the next week or 2 you'll get another rain, it might be on another quarter land. So basically you're looking at the growth of the crops from the time you plant them till the time you get harvest time. Some that you can do some people have irrigation. You can put irrigation pipes in and you can water the fields with the same amount of rain to the whole field, the circle. But if you don't have irrigation, you're at the mercy of the weather and the rain amounts and all that. Hailstorms, windstorms, tornado, we'll get them just like other states do, and maybe not as often. But they get stronger plants now that will take storms, strong winds, hail, and not do as much damage as they would have maybe 20, 30 years ago. If you take a rain gauge, any rain gauge, will usually have a marking on it. Some you can see, some get faded by the wind. This side is inches, this side is meters, and so you look, we usually go by inches up here. A good rain is a good inch rain, a little more than an inch, but if you can get 20, 30 hundredths every 2 or 3 days, that's about all you need to get a good crop or to get a good set of flowers.
So then you wouldn't water
as much. We water the yard with automatic sprinklers, but we shut it off if we get a lot of rain like we have had the last couple of weeks here. We'll shut the sprinklers down for a while. Starts getting dry and not getting rain like this next week. We're supposed to be in the 80s all week, so we'll probably turn the sprinklers back on and make sure we water some of the plants that are around the house. You don't want to use lake water next to the house, because there's I don't know what they call it, but it's rain or lake water will leave your house with dark markings on it, and it's getting overgrown by the plants I planted because they grew bigger than I thought they would. But that's an ivory silk tree, the little tree in the middle. These are red Prince Weigelias, which still have the flowers on them. That's a rose bush, and that is I'm trying to think of that. I had 2 of them out of, but I can't remember the name of that one either. And those are sumac. Those are tiger eye sumac. I planted that, and it'll shoot its sprout out, and it'll show a couple of them growing up the hill and coming out there.
Nice.
And there's some of those are on the ledge over here. It's one of the biggest ones we got here. That just
is that a spruce?
Huh?
Is that a spruce?
They're Colorado blue spruce.
Colorado blue spruce.
They look blue
this one too?
And this one, I've had different names for it. I'm not sure. It's larkspur, I thought it was. Somebody said no, it's a different. But it gets these are little red berries. They're all over and they're bright red. These are kind of already past their mark here, but when they first blossom these things out, you can kind of see they're red, but they're a bright red, almost like a strawberry red. And the whole tree has that all over the place, but we never eat them. Don't know if they're any good to eat or not.